The morning of August 16, 1942, began like any other wartime morning on the California coast. At 06:03 local time, the United States Navy airship L-8, a former Goodyear Blimp, pressed into military service, lifted gracefully from its mooring at Treasure Island. Its mission was a routine but vital anti-submarine patrol off the coast of San Francisco. Inside the gondola were two experienced pilots, Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and Ensign Charles Ellis Adams. The waters below were tense. The nation was on high alert for enemy naval activity, and the L-8 was the aerial watchdog for the Golden Gate. By 07:42, the Blimp was in position, reporting itself as 4 nautical miles east of the Farallon Islands, scanning the gray Pacific waters. Shortly after, the crew's final and only radio message of consequence crackled into the control center. They were investigating a suspicious oil slick on the water's surface. In the context of 1942, an oil slick was not a mere environmental concern. It was a potential sign of an enemy submarine, a predator lurking beneath the waves. The L-8's crew, acting on their training, would have descended to get a closer look, dropping markers to pinpoint the location for surface vessels. Then, silence. Radio contact was lost. For hours, the L-8 simply ceased to be part of the naval grid. The silence stretched from minutes to hours. At 10:49, a Pan Am Clipper, a massive flying boat, reported sighting the L-8, but it was over the Golden Gate Bridge appearing to drift. At 11:00, a Navy OS-2U patrol plane spotted it again, 3 miles west of Salada Beach, noting it was above a solid layer of overcast clouds. The airship was moving, but it was no longer on patrol. It was a derelict, carried by the wind. At approximately 11:15, the mystery shifted from a military concern to a bizarre civilian spectacle. 2 men swimming in the surf off the beach below the Olympic Club golf course looked up to see the massive airship drifting low over the waves. Its engines were silent. Its heavy mooring lines were dragging in the water. The swimmers, sensing the emergency, attempted to wrangle the wayward craft, fighting the surf to grab the tethers, but the Blimp was too unruly. It continued its silent journey inland, bumping up a cliff face near Fort Funston. The impact dislodged one of its Mark 17 depth charges, which landed harmlessly on one of the golf course fairways. This event, seemingly minor, had a critical consequence. The sudden loss of the charge's immense weight made the airship buoyant again. It freed itself from the cliff and rose, climbing back into the sky, now lighter and at the complete mercy of the coastal winds. The L-8, its hull now visibly sagging as helium automatically vented, began a final, uncontrolled drift east toward Daly City. Onlookers watched, stunned, as the Blimp's dragging lines scraped rooftops and became entangled in telephone and power lines. Its journey finally ended with a soft, lurching crash in the middle of Bellevue Avenue, in front of a residential home. Firefighters and police who had observed the bizarre scene rushed to the gondola. They approached with extreme caution, fully expecting to find a badly injured or perhaps deceased crew inside. They cut open the hull to gain access to the gondola and braced for what they would find. They found nothing. The gondola was empty. Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams had vanished. The mystery only deepened upon inspection. The interior of the control car was in perfect order. There were no signs of a struggle or any emergency evacuation. The cabin door was found locked in the open position. Most perplexing of all, the emergency equipment was untouched. The crew's parachutes were still neatly stored in their proper place. The lifeboat was still on board. In a briefcase, investigators found the classified documents, which the crew was under strict orders to protect at all times. The 2 men had not prepared for a water landing, nor had they prepared to jump. They were simply gone. But, on the other side of the world, the U.S. Army Air Forces were facing a different kind of mystery, not of a missing crew, but of an aircraft that was present, powerful and lethally flawed. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning was, by any measure, an aircraft from the future, dropped into the skies of 1941. Conceived by the brilliant minds of Lockheed engineers Hall L. Hibbard and Clarence Kelly Johnson, it was the most innovative plane of its day. It was a radical departure from traditional fighter design, featuring a distinctive twin-boom layout and a central nacelle that held the cockpit, and a devastating, concentrated array of 450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon. It was a technological marvel, a force of nature powered by two massive, supercharged Allison V-1710 engines. Upon its official introduction, it was capable of reaching 400 miles per hour, a full 190 meters, faster than almost any other fighter in the world, and could climb to 3,300 feet in a single minute. This revolutionary design was not just a fighter. Its versatility was legendary. It could be configured as a long-range escort, a highly effective fighter bomber, a dive bomber, and one of the war's most prolific photo reconnaissance platforms. When it appeared in the skies over North Africa, German pilots who encountered its speed and firepower gave it a name steeped in fear: Der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. But this devil harbored a secret, a terrifying flaw that haunted its pilots and baffled its creators. Reports from test pilots and later from combat pilots began to filter back to Lockheed, all describing the same horrific, uncontrollable phenomenon. The P-38 performed beautifully in most conditions, but in a high-speed dive, especially from high altitude, something went terribly wrong. It would begin with a violent shaking of the aircraft's tail. Then, suddenly, the pilot's controls would lock up, the yoke becoming useless, as if frozen in concrete. Worse, the aircraft's nose would tuck under on its own, steepening the dive and pulling the pilot into an ever faster, inescapable plunge toward the Earth. This terrifying phenomenon, later identified as Mach tuck, was a new and unknown demon of the skies. Pilots had only one desperate chance: to ride out the terrifying dive and pray they reach the denser air of lower altitudes. Only there, the increased drag might slow the plane enough for the controls to respond. Many pilots, however, did not have the altitude to spare. Lockheed's engineers were mystified and in a desperate race for a solution. Their first theory was flutter, a well-known problem where aerodynamic forces cause a surface, like a tail, to vibrate uncontrollably until it tears itself apart. They tried strengthening the P-38's tail, even skinning one with aluminum 63% thicker than standard. It made no difference. At the insistence of Army officials, they added various configurations of external mass balances to the elevator, a common fix for flutter. Test flights proved these were also useless. The problem persisted. Their next theory was aerodynamic buffeting, where a disruption in the airflow over the wing would strike the tail, causing it to shake. They designed and installed filleting at the junction where the wing met the fuselage. This fix actually worked. It completely solved the buffeting problem, but the devil's dive, the high-speed control lockup, remained. The engineers were facing a terrifying reality. Their aircraft was so advanced that it was encountering unknown forces. It was flying faster than any other fighter, approaching the speed of sound so closely that the airflow itself was changing, becoming compressible, and creating shock waves on the wings, a realm of physics that engineers at the time barely understood. The search for a solution turned tragic, proving the engineers were truly in uncharted territory. On November 4, 1941, Lockheed test pilot Ralph Virden climbed into a YP-38 to test a new potential fix: special spring-loaded servo tabs on the elevator. The theory was that these tabs would give the pilot the extra mechanical muscle needed to fight the tuck and pull the plane's nose up. Virden took the aircraft up and put it into the requisite dive. As he gained speed, reaching Mach 0.675, the inevitable happened. The nose tucked under and the plane pitched manically. Virden activated the new servo tabs. They worked, but as a later report grimly noted, they worked too well. the combined unknown forces of the high-speed dive and the sudden violent force of the new tabs were too much for the airframe to bear. The massive G-forces generated during the recovery attempt ripped the entire tail assembly off the aircraft. Ralph Virden was lost in the subsequent crash. His death was a terrible blow. It proved that the engineers' fix was not only wrong, but violently fatal. It was the moment they realized they were not fighting a simple mechanical flaw. They were fighting a fundamental law of physics they did not comprehend. The Army Air Forces had its most promising new fighter, a machine that pilots in the Pacific were just beginning to fly. Yet, back in California, its creators were forced to admit that this war-winning aircraft had a flaw that could, at any moment, seize control from the pilot and plunge them to their doom. And as of late 1941, they had absolutely no idea how to fix it. But the pilots being sent to the Pacific, thousands of miles from the engineering labs, had no time to worry about high-altitude compressibility. They had a more immediate problem: the enemy. And one farm boy from Wisconsin was about to meet them, flying the very plane that baffled his superiors. Richard Ira Bong was born on September 24, 1920, in the small town of Superior, Wisconsin. He was the first of 9 children born to Carl and Dora Bong. He grew up not in the town of Superior, but on the family's small farm in the nearby village of Poplar, Wisconsin. His father, Carl, was a Swedish immigrant who had come to the United States as a boy, and the family's life was built on the foundations of hard work and loyalty. Richard's upbringing was, in many ways, the definition of the all-American ideal of the era. Like all farm children, he had chores, and from a young age he was expected to learn his way around farm equipment and machinery. His youth was spent in the pristine Northwoods of Wisconsin, where he became an avid hunter and fisherman, developing a keen eye and a steady hand. He was, by all accounts, a quiet, humble, and capable young man. That quiet life in the fields of Poplar would be forever changed by a simple coincidence of geography and national affairs. In the 1920s, the 30th U.S. President, Calvin Coolidge, developed a deep affection for northern Wisconsin, particularly its world-class fishing along the Brule River. Coolidge went as far as setting up a summer White House in Superior to conduct the nation's business from his beloved retreat. To maintain the day-to-day operations of the presidency, Coolidge had military airmail planes fly in daily with news, messages, and documents. By a twist of fate, the flight path for these military planes passed directly over the Bong family farm in Poplar. Each day, the young Richard Bong would stop his work in the fields, look up into the clouds, and watch these symbols of speed and freedom roar overhead. This simple, repeated event ignited a fascination that would define his life. He recalled later, "The planes flew right over our heads, and I knew that I wanted to be a pilot." This new aspiration drove his education. After graduating from Superior Central High School in 1938, Bong enrolled at the nearby Superior State Teachers College. He was not there long before he acted on his dream. He joined the college's civilian pilot training program, a new government initiative designed to create a backlog of trained pilots, and also took private flying lessons to enhance his skills. The pull of the sky was stronger than the classroom, and on May 29, 1941, he enlisted as a cadet in the Army Air Corps Aviation Cadet Program. He was sent for training to California at Tulare and Gardner Fields, and finally to Luke Field, Arizona. It was here that his instructors realized he was not just a good pilot, he was a natural. His innate talent was immediately apparent. One of his gunnery instructors at Luke Field was Captain Barry Goldwater, the future U.S. Senator. Goldwater later described Bong as a very bright student who was already showing his talent as a pilot. Bong was so adept, particularly at aerial gunnery, that upon receiving his wings and commission as a second lieutenant, on January 9, 1942, just 1 month after the attack on Pearl Harbor, he was made a gunnery instructor himself. His time as an instructor was brief. In May 1942, he was transferred to Hamilton Field, California, and assigned to the 49th Fighter Squadron, 14th Fighter Group. His new task was to transition to and master the Army's newest, fastest, and most complex fighter, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. This was the very same aircraft that, at that exact time, was baffling engineers and had already killed test pilot Ralph Virden in a high-speed dive. While the engineers in Burbank were wrestling with unsolvable problems of compressibility and Mach tuck, Bong climbed into the cockpit of the fork-tailed devil and felt at home. His natural instinctive piloting and his feel for machinery, born on a farm in Poplar, connected with the aircraft in a way the engineers could not quantify. In a letter to his mother, he attempted to describe the P-38, a plane his superiors saw as lethally flawed. His assessment was simple and telling. "It's quite an airplane," he wrote. "It's the fastest I have ever flown, and is the easiest plane to fly that I have yet flown." The farm boy from Poplar had tamed the devil, unaware of the high-altitude demons that lurked within its design, flaws he was unlikely to ever encounter in the low to medium-altitude combat that awaited him in the Pacific. His training on the easy P-38 was quickly put to the test. In September 1942, with the P-38's dive flaw still a closely guarded secret, Second Lieutenant Bong was sent to the Southwest Pacific. When Second Lieutenant Richard Bong arrived in the Southwest Pacific Theater in September 1942, he was just another new pilot with a P-38 assigned to the 9th Fighter Squadron of the 49th Fighter Group in Australia. He entered a brutal air war, where combat was a swirling, close-range affair. On December 27, 1942, during the pivotal Battle of Bunagona in New Guinea, Bong engaged the enemy and scored his first 2 confirmed victories, a Val dive bomber and an Oscar fighter. It was the beginning of a meteoric rise. Less than 2 weeks later, on January 8, 1943, he downed his 5th enemy aircraft, officially becoming an ace. For a pilot who had only just arrived in theater, it was a stunning display of prowess. His success was largely attributed to his complete and total rejection of standard combat doctrine. The accepted tactic was to fire from a safe distance, conserving ammunition. Bong, leveraging his natural marksmanship, did the opposite. His entire method was built on one simple, risky principle: get closer. He later credited his success to flying as close to the enemy as possible. He would hold his fire, pushing his P-38 in on his target until he was so close that he could lessen the chance to miss. This tactic was incredibly dangerous, exposing him to debris and return fire, but it was also lethally effective. It maximized the devastating concentrated firepower of the P-38's nose-mounted cannons. His fellow pilots, who rated him one of the best shots in the Air Corps, described him as a daring and imaginative pilot, a quiet man who became a calculating hunter in the cockpit. Bong's daring and pinpoint accuracy soon became the stuff of legend, illustrated by an incident that had nothing to do with enemy aircraft. During a rescue mission in New Guinea, Bong was flying his P-38 as top cover, circling overhead to protect his comrades. Below him, 3 fellow pilots in a small rubber boat were paddling across a lake to retrieve a downed airman who had been missing in the jungle. As he watched from above, Bong noticed a dark shape in the water, a large crocodile trailing close behind the boat. Charged with protecting his men, Bong took immediate action. He dove his P-38 low, gliding fast and level right over the water's surface. With what was described as a precise burst of 20-millimeter cannon fire, he hit the animal, blasting it away from the boat and saving his crew from the threat. Newspapers back home, who sometimes misidentified the crocodile as an alligator, seized on the incredible tale. His comrades joked that he should paint a crocodile on the side of his P-38. The story was more than a curiosity. It was a demonstration of his ice-cold nerves and his ability to use the P-38 as a precision instrument. Bong's victory tally climbed relentlessly. By November 1943, he had 21 victories and was rotated home for a much-needed leave. He returned to the Pacific, and on April 12, 1944, he had one of the most significant days of his career. During a single mission over Hollandia, he shot down 3 Japanese planes. His 27th victory, achieved that day, was a national milestone. He had officially surpassed the 26-kill record set by America's World War I ace of aces, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. The moment was historic. Rickenbacker himself sent a message of congratulations to the new ace. Bong was promoted to major by his commander, General George C. Kenney. It was during this period that Bong flew his most famous aircraft, a P-38J, serial number 42-13993, that he nicknamed Marge, painting a portrait of his sweetheart back home, Marjorie Vattendahl, on its nose. After breaking the record, Bong was a national hero, and General Kenney, a savvy leader, knew he was too valuable to risk. Kenney pulled him from the front line, but he also understood his star pilot. Instead of grounding him completely, Kenney reassigned Bong as an assistant operations officer and later as an advanced gunnery instructor. This new role came with a crucial distinction. Bong was neither required nor expected to perform combat duty. However, at his own urgent request, he was permitted to continue flying voluntary combat missions, leading flights as he had always done. This was a brilliant piece of management by Kenney. It officially kept the ace of aces safe on paper, while allowing the pilot, who always flew as a flight leader rather than a squadron commander, to do what he did best. Under this voluntary status, Bong flew 30 more combat missions, destroying 12 more enemy planes. On December 17, 1944, he shot down a Japanese Oscar over San Jose, his 40th and final confirmed victory. With 40 confirmed victories, 200 combat missions, and over 500 combat hours, Richard Bong was, without question, America's ace of aces. General Kenney decided that was enough and ordered him home for good. 5 days before scoring his 40th and final victory, Richard Bong's status as a national legend was made official. General George Kenney's recommendation had been approved. On December 12, 1944, Major Richard Bong stood on a rain-soaked airstrip at Tacloban, Leyte, in the Philippines. The men of the 475th and 49th Fighter Groups stood at formation in the rain as General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander of the Southwest Pacific Area, stepped forward to conduct a special ceremony. There, on an active runway, MacArthur presented Bong with the nation's highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor. The official citation for the medal was unique, perfectly capturing the nature of Bong's service. It cited his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action above and beyond the call of duty, specifically for the period of October 10 to November 15, 1944. During that time, though assigned to duty as gunnery instructor and neither required nor expected to perform combat duty, Major Bong had, at his own urgent request, voluntarily engaged in repeated hazardous combat missions, resulting in his shooting down 8 enemy airplanes. After his 40th kill, General Kenney made his order final. Bong's combat career was over. He was sent home for good in January 1945. He returned to the United States not just as a pilot, but as the Ace of Aces, a symbol of American victory. He was quickly dispatched on extensive war bond tours, sharing stages with numerous celebrities as part of the public relations effort. He was, by all accounts, modest and uncomfortable with the fame, but he performed his duty. He also took the opportunity to complete his most important personal mission. On February 10, 1945, he returned to his hometown of Superior, Wisconsin. There, the national hero married his sweetheart, Marjorie Vattendahl, the namesake of his famous P-38. The wedding was a national news event, and the two became one of America's most celebrated couples. Back on the family farm in Poplar, his parents, Carl and Dora, breathed a sigh of relief. Their son had survived 200 combat missions. He was finally safe. But the Ace of Aces was a pilot first and a hero second. He couldn't stay on the ground. He had seen the future of aviation, and he was completely fascinated by it. The future was not propellers, it was the jet engine. He had seen the new, top-secret Lockheed P-38 Shooting Star, and as his sister recalled, he knew he had to fly that plane, and he asked for the assignment. His request was granted. In June 1945, he was transferred from his public relations tour to Wright Field as a test pilot. Soon after, he was sent to the Lockheed Air Terminal in Burbank, California, assuming the role of Chief of Flight Operations and serving as an Air Force acceptance test pilot for the new jets rolling off the assembly line. This was a tragic pivot. Bong was the undisputed master of the propeller-driven P-38, a machine he found easy to fly. But the P-80 was a revolutionary and dangerously unreliable new technology. It was America's first operational jet fighter, rushed into production to counter German jets. The aptly named Shooting Star was plagued with design problems. It had already crashed more than a dozen times and had killed several of America's best test pilots. The P-80's flaws were not in aerodynamics, like the P-38's, but in its brand-new, complex and unproven technology, its turbojet engine, and, most notably, its troublesome fuel system. This was an entirely new and unforgiving world of aviation, and Bong was, in effect, a novice. The danger was palpable. Just 4 days before Bong's final flight, another test pilot was killed in a P-80 crash. By the beginning of August 1945, Richard Bong, the man who had survived over 500 combat hours, had logged a total of only 12 flights in the new jet, amounting to a mere 4 hours and 15 minutes of flight time. He was transitioning from a world he had completely mastered to a world no one yet fully understood. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Richard Bong woke early. He was scheduled for another acceptance flight in the P-80A. He expressed his excitement to Marge and left for the Lockheed facility. On August 6, 1945, Major Richard Bong, America's ace of aces, arrived at the Lockheed Air Terminal in Burbank for what was supposed to be a routine acceptance flight. The aircraft was a brand-new P-80A-1LO Shooting Star, serial number 4485048. This would be his 13th flight in the new jet. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, the P-80A's jet engine spooled up, and Bong began his takeoff roll. To witnesses on the ground, something seemed to go wrong almost immediately. The factory-fresh plane took to the air, but just as it was 150 feet up, a large puff of white smoke billowed from its tail. The aircraft continued to ascend, but it was clear it was in trouble. The subsequent accident investigation report would pinpoint the exact, catastrophic failure. The aircraft's primary fuel pump had malfunctioned during takeoff. This was a known, fatal flaw in the early P-80s. The aircraft was equipped with a backup fuel pump, but in the critical, high-stakes seconds of takeoff, the pilot had to manually switch it on. Bong, with only 4 hours and 15 minutes of experience in the jet, was a master of the P-38, but a novice in the P-80. His muscle memory was not for this new, complex machine. The investigation concluded that he had forgot or was unable to engage the backup pump in time. The engine flamed out. The aircraft, now a heavy, silent glider, rolled upside down. Bong was too low to save the plane, but he still had one last decision to make. He was directly over a residential area of North Hollywood. According to eyewitnesses and family accounts, he used his last moments of control to steer the failing jet away from homes and toward a narrow, open field. Having guided the P-80 away from civilians, he attempted to bail out. The canopy came off, and he exited the aircraft. But he was far too low. His parachute, caught in the tail assembly for a moment, never had time to unfurl. The P-80 crashed in a fireball at the intersection of Oxnard Street and Satsuma Avenue. Major Richard Ira Bong, the hero who had survived 200 combat missions, was gone at the age of 24. The following day, his death shared the front page of newspapers across the country with another world-changing event. the first news of the atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima. Richard Bong, the undisputed master of the P-38, had met his end in the cockpit of a P-80. But the mystery he had left behind, the mystery of the P-38's Devil's Dive that had stalked its design and killed pilots like Ralph Virden, would not go unsolved. While Bong was racking up his victories in the Pacific, Lockheed's engineers, led by Kelly Johnson, had finally cracked the code. The problem, they discovered, was compressibility. The center of pressure on the wing was shifting backward as supersonic shock waves formed, causing the Mach tuck. The solution was not strength, it was geometry. In February 1943, they developed an ingenious solution: quick-acting dive flaps. These were not traditional speed brakes. They were small, innovative flaps installed on the underside of the wing, outboard of the engine nacelles. When a pilot entered a high-speed dive, they could deploy these flaps, which would extend downward 35 degrees in just 1.5 seconds. This simple mechanical action fundamentally changed the geometry of the wing's lower surface. This change altered the pressure distribution, keeping the lift within bounds, and, crucially, preventing the center of pressure from shifting. It broke up the shock wave, kept the airflow attached to the tail, and gave full control back to the pilot. The new flaps needed a test pilot brave enough to prove they worked. That man was Tony Levier. Levier was sent to England, where pilots in the 8th Air Force, having lost many comrades in dives, were deeply skeptical of the P-38. Levier gave a lecture on the new flaps, but the pilots were not overly impressed. So he provided a demonstration. He took his flap-equipped P-38 up to 25,000 feet. The pilots on the ground rushed out to watch, expecting a crash. Levier pointed the nose straight down, entering the very devil's dive that had terrified the Air Corps. The plane plummeted vertically. Then Levier deployed the new flaps. To the astonishment of everyone watching, he pulled out of the dive easily, with no issue. To add, as the report says, extra emphasis, he then descended to a low altitude and performed several one-engine rolls. The demonstration was a spectacular success. Field modification kits were rushed to every theater, and the final production models, the P-38J and P-38L, the very planes Bong flew for his final victories, had the dive flaps installed at the factory. The mystery of Chapter 2 was solved. The fork-tailed devil had finally been tamed.